It was a day probably much like today that a few of Jesus' followers on that day in which he had risen were walking on a dusty road, much like this, talking with one another, looking around, when suddenly they were joined by someone else, asking them questions about what they were discussing. And they shared that they had been told that Jesus had risen from the dead, and they weren't quite sure what to expect. This stranger began to share with them from Scripture, and when they arrived at a place to rest and share a meal, it was in the breaking of the bread that they realized who it was in their midst, who it was that had been walking with them along the road, that it was Christ himself. They suddenly felt foolish that they had not realized that they had been with the risen Lord. That story is the story of the road to Emmaus, and as those followers walked along the road, they felt encouraged by this stranger, but their eyes hadn't quite yet been opened to realize who it was that was walking alongside them. We are reminded that whatever road it is that we find ourselves walking on, that Christ indeed is walking alongside us. We may not always recognize or realize, but when we stop to look around us, to look at the beauty of creation, to give thanks for the small yet beautiful miracles of new life that are springing forth, we are reminded both by the world around us and by the peace and hope within us that Christ has risen and Christ is alive and Christ is walking with us along life's road, with us on the journey to encourage us and empower us. May our eyes be open. May our hearts be willing to see, to hear, to comprehend all that God is doing. And may God continue to guide and strengthen you on your journey. I invite you to read from Luke 24, verses 13 through 35, as you too put yourself in the place of those early disciples on the road to Emmaus. And may God guide you on your journey this day.